Karen thought she could bully the new neighbor with impunity. But when she confronted him over his Wi-Fi password, he turned the tables in a way she never saw coming. Now her carefully constructed world is about to come crashing down, and she'll learn a hard lesson of the cost of prejudice. Karen Steinbrenner stared out the window, fuming. Her manicured nails tapped an impatient rhythm on the kitchen counter as she glared at the modest ranch house next door. I can't believe he moved in. Here, of all places. She shook her head in disgust. Who, dear? Her husband Ted asked, not looking up from his newspaper. The new neighbor. That black man. She practically spat the words. This is our neighborhood. We don't need his kind around here, stirring up trouble. Ted sighed. Karen, you can't just. Don't tell me what I can and can't do, Theodore. She snapped. I'm going to have a little chat with him. Make sure he understands the rules around here. Before Ted could respond, Karen grabbed her purse and swept out the door, her footsteps echoing with purpose. She marched across the neatly manicured lawn, rehearsing her lines. By the time she reached the front door, a smug smile had settled on her lips. She rang the bell and waited, tapping her foot. After a moment, the door swung open to reveal a tall, well-built man in his 30s. He regarded her with a polite, questioning look. Can I help you? Yes, you can. Karen thrust out her chin. I'm your neighbor, Karen Steinbrenner. I live right next door, and I have a bone to pick with you. The man's brow furrowed. I'm sorry, have I done something to offend you? As a matter of fact, you have. Karen's eyes narrowed. I've noticed you've been using our Wi-Fi network. That needs to stop immediately. Your Wi-Fi network? The man's confusion was evident. I'm sorry, but I set up my own network when I moved in. I haven't used anyone else's. Don't play dumb with me. Karen's voice dripped with disdain. I know you've been leeching off our connection. Well, I'm putting a stop to it right now. Change your password and make sure you stay off our network from now on. The man stared at her, speechless. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. Mrs. Steinbrenner, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is my home, and the Wi-Fi network you're referring to is mine. I paid to have it installed when I moved in last week. Karen's face flushed with anger. That's impossible. This is our neighborhood, and we don't take kindly to freeloaders. Now, I'm going to give you one more chance to. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The man's tone was polite, but firm. I won't tolerate harassment on my own property. If you have any other concerns, I'd be happy to discuss them with you in a respectful manner. But I will not change the password to my own Wi-Fi network. Karen opened her mouth to retort, but the man calmly closed the door in her face. She stood there, seething, her hands shaking with fury. How dare he dismiss her like that? Didn't he know who she was? Turning on her heel, Karen stormed back to her house, her mind racing. This was unacceptable. She would not be ignored. Something had to be done. As Karen marched back into her kitchen, Ted looked up with a concerned frown. Well, how did it go? Karen slammed her purse down on the counter. That man is infuriating. Can you believe he had the nerve to tell me I'm not allowed on his Wi-Fi network? In our own neighborhood. Ted sighed. Karen, it sounds like there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe you should. A misunderstanding? Karen scoffed. There's no misunderstanding. He's a freeloader, plain and simple. And I won't stand for it. She began pacing the kitchen, her mind whirring. This is our neighborhood, Ted. We can't just let some outsider come in and start making his own rules. I won't allow it. Ted watched her warily. What are you planning to do? Karen paused, a crafty smile spreading across her lips. Don't worry, dear. I have a plan. Over the next few days, Karen set her plan in motion. She started by calling the homeowners association, complaining about the suspicious activity of the new neighbor. The HOA promised to look into it and send someone to investigate. Next, she reached out to her friend Jessica, who worked as a paralegal at a prestigious law firm. Karen knew Jessica owed her a favor, and she was more than happy to cash it in. "I need you to do some dating on our new neighbor," Karen told her over coffee. "Find out everything you can about him, his background, his finances, any skeletons in his closet, anything that could be used against him." Jessica's eyes widened. "Karen, I'm not sure that's such a good idea. Doesn't that seem a little underhanded?" "Underhanded?" Karen scoffed. "This is about protecting our neighborhood, Jessica. I'm just doing what needs to be done." After some prodding, Jessica reluctantly agreed. Within a week, she had a dossier full of information on the new neighbor, whose name was revealed to be Marcus Wilkins. Armed with this intel, Karen began her next phase of attack. She started spreading rumors around the neighborhood, planting seeds of doubt and suspicion. She hinted that Marcus was a criminal or maybe even an illegal immigrant. She whispered stories about shady business dealings and unpaid taxes. Soon, the once friendly cul-de-sac was abuzz with gossip and unease. Neighbors who had once waved and smiled at Marcus now averted their eyes when he passed by. The HOA representatives grew more aggressive in their investigation, and Marcus found himself on the receiving end of more than a few hostile glares. Karen sat back, watching it all unfold with a smug satisfaction. Her plan was working perfectly. Soon, Marcus Wilkins would learn that he couldn't just waltz into her neighborhood and think he could do as he pleased. Marcus Wilkins had always prided himself on being a patient, level-headed man. But as the weeks passed and the harassment from his neighbor Karen and the homeowners association became increasingly relentless, even his considerable reserve was starting to wear thin. It began with the notices from the HOA demanding that he provide documentation proving his ownership of the property and the Wi-Fi network. When he dutifully complied, the requests only became more intrusive, delving into his personal finances and employment history. Then came the whispers from his other neighbors, who once greeted him warmly but now averted their eyes or muttered under their breath as he passed by. Marcus tried to engage them, to understand what had changed, but they would only shake their heads and change the subject. One day, as Marcus was mowing his lawn, a well-dressed woman from the HOA strode up the driveway, her heels clicking with purpose. "Mr. Wilkins, we've received several complaints about your property and your conduct in the neighborhood," she announced, her tone clipped and accusatory. "I'm afraid we're going to have to ask you to attend a hearing to address these concerns." Marcus paused, the lawnmower sputtering as he turned it off. "Concerns? What concerns? I've done nothing wrong." The woman's lips thinned into a tight smile. "That remains to be seen. The hearing is scheduled for next week. I suggest you come prepared to explain yourself." With that, she turned on her heel and marched back down the driveway, leaving Marcus staring after her, a growing sense of unease settling in the pit of his stomach. That evening, as he sat at his kitchen table staring at the stack of documents the HOA had requested, Marcus's frustration finally boiled over. He slammed his fist down, rattling the dishes. "This is ridiculous. I've done nothing wrong, and they're treating me like a criminal." He ran a hand through his hair, his brow furrowed. "Something's not right here. There's more going on than they're letting on." Determined to get to the bottom of it, Marcus began sifting through the documents, searching for any clues that might explain the sudden animosity from his neighbors. As he pored over the paperwork, a thought suddenly occurred to him. Wait a minute. His eyes narrowed as he made a connection. The Wi-Fi network. That's what this is all about. Pushing back from the table, Marcus strode to the living room and switched on his laptop. He quickly pulled up the network settings, scanning the list of nearby connections. Sure enough, there was his neighbor's network, labeled Steinbrenner Home. Marcus let out a humorless laugh. So that's it. Karen Steinbrenner thinks I'm freeloading off her network. No wonder she's got the whole neighborhood riled up against me. Shaking his head, He began typing furiously, his fingers flying across the keyboard. If Karen wanted a fight, he was more than happy to give her one. But this time, the gloves were coming off. The day of the Homeowners Association hearing dawned bright and clear, but Marcus Wilkins felt anything but sunny. As he pulled into the driveway of the community center, his knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. "All right, Marcus. Time to face the music," he muttered, taking a deep, steadying breath before getting out of the car. As he approached the entrance, he couldn't help but notice the sideways glances and hushed whispers of the other residents. It was clear that the campaign of misinformation spearheaded by his neighbor Karen had been wildly successful. Squaring his shoulders, Marcus pushed open the door and stepped into the bustling community center. He made his way to the meeting room, where a half-dozen members of the HOA board were already seated around a long table, their expressions ranging from stern to outright hostile. "Ah, Mr. Wilkins, so glad you could join us," the HOA president, a well-coiffed woman named Veronica, drawled. "Please, have a seat." Marcus nodded stiffly and took the empty chair at the end of the table, trying to ignore the weight of the other board members' gazes. "Now, I'm sure you're wondering why you've been summoned here today," Veronica continued, fixing him with a piercing stare. "We've received a number of concerning reports about your conduct in the neighborhood." "Conduct?" Marcus raised a skeptical brow. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about." Veronica's thin lips curled into a humorless smile. "Well, let's start with the issue of your Wi-Fi network, shall we? We've had multiple complaints from your neighbors about you illegally accessing their private connection." Marcus felt his blood begin to boil. That's simply not true. "I have my own Wi-Fi network that I paid to have installed when I moved in. I haven't used anyone else's connection." "Is that so?" Veronica leaned back in her chair, clasping her hands together. "Then perhaps you can explain the fact that your network is broadcasting under the same SSID as the Steinbrenner residence next door." Marcus's eyes widened as the implications sank in. "Wait, you mean to tell me that Karen Steinbrenner has been claiming my network as her own?" "That's exactly what we're saying, Mr. Wilkins." Veronica's tone dripped with condescension. "And frankly, we find it quite concerning. It makes us wonder what other nefarious activities you might be up to." Marcus felt his face flush with anger. "Nefarious activities? I'm the one being harassed here. Your so-called investigation is nothing more than a witch hunt, and it's being led by a neighbor who has it out for me for no good reason." Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves." Veronica raised a placating hand. "We're simply trying to get to the bottom of this situation and ensure that our community remains a safe and harmonious place for all residents." "Safe and harmonious?" Marcus scoffed. "That's rich, coming from an organization that's clearly under the thumb of a vindictive, racist neighbor." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs, and Veronica's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I will not sit here and be accused of racism, young man. You would do well to watch your tone." Marcus leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "With all due respect, Madam President, I think it's you and this board who need to watch your step. Because if you don't put a stop to this witch hunt, I can promise you that you'll be hearing from my lawyer." Veronica's face flushed with anger, but before she could respond, the sound of the door slamming open drew everyone's attention. All eyes turned to the figure standing in the doorway, a grim-faced Karen Steinbrenner, her hands trembling. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice shrill. Marcus felt a grim sense of satisfaction as he met her gaze. It was time to turn the tables. All eyes in the room turned to the towering figure of Karen Steinbrenner as she burst through the door, her face flushed with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice shrill. Veronica, the HOA president, cleared her throat and attempted to regain control of the situation. "Mrs. Steinbrenner, we were just in the middle of addressing some concerns about your neighbor, Mr. Wilkins, and his Wi-Fi network." Karen's gaze snapped to Marcus, her eyes narrowing with undisguised hostility. "Concerns? What concerns? I'm the one who filed the complaint about him stealing our Wi-Fi. Marcus couldn't help but let out a derisive laugh. Stealing your Wi-Fi? Really, Mrs. Steinbrenner? Is that the best you can come up with? Karen's face contorted with rage. Don't you dare mock me, you thief. Everyone knows you've been leeching off our network. How dare you try to turn this around on me? Veronica raised a hand, trying to interject. Now, let's all just calm down and... Calm down. Karen rounded on the HOA president, her voice dripping with venom. I will not calm down. Not until this criminal is run out of our neighborhood. Marcus felt his temper flare. Criminal? I've done nothing wrong, Mrs. Steinbrenner. In fact, I think it's you who has some explaining to do. He turned to the rest of the board, his expression grave. You see, I've been doing a little digging of my own. And it seems that the Wi-Fi network I've been stealing from is actually registered in my name. The same name that appears on the deed to my house. A hush fell over the room as the implications sank in. Karen's face drained of color, and she clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. That's impossible, she stammered. Marcus shook his head, a sardonic smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Oh, but it's very possible, Mrs. Steinbrenner. In fact, I have the paperwork right here to prove it. He pulled a thick file from his briefcase and began rifling through the pages. You see, when I moved in, I made sure to set up my own Wi-Fi network, just as any responsible homeowner would do. And imagine my surprise when I discovered that the network you've been claiming as your own is actually registered to me. He paused, letting the words sink in. It seems you've been trying to deceive not only me, but this entire homeowners association. And I have to wonder, what else have you been hiding? The room erupted in a cacophony of whispers and murmurs as the board members exchanged bewildered glances. Veronica, her composure visibly rattled, cleared her throat. Mr. Wilkins, if what you're saying is true, then this is a very serious matter indeed. I'm afraid we'll need to adjourn this meeting and conduct a thorough investigation. Karen's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. Investigation? But you can't do that. This is all a misunderstanding, I swear. Marcus folded his arms across his chest, his gaze unwavering. Oh, I assure you, Mrs. Steinbrenner, this is no misunderstanding. And I think the board is about to discover just how deep the rabbit hole goes. As the room descended into chaos, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. It seemed that the tables had finally turned, and Karen's carefully constructed web of deceit was about to come crashing down around her. The Homeowners Association meeting had descended into pandemonium. Karen Steinbrenner stood frozen, her face a mask of barely contained panic as the board members debated how to proceed. Veronica, the HOA president, cleared her throat and tried to restore order. All right, everyone, let's try to remain calm and approach this situation rationally. Mr. Wilkins, you claim that the Wi-Fi network in question is actually registered to you. Marcus nodded, his expression grave. That's correct. I have the documentation right here to prove it. He shuffled through the papers in his file, pulling out several official-looking documents. As you can see, the network SSID, login credentials, and billing information all list me as the account holder. I had it installed when I moved in a few months ago. Veronica's brow furrowed as she scanned the paperwork. This all seems to be in order. But Mrs. Steinbrenner, you say you've been using this network. Can you explain that? Karen's face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. I don't know how that happened. I mean, I've always used that network, and it's always been listed as the Steinbrenner Home SSID. I'd assumed it belonged to us. Assumed? Marcus interjected, his voice dripping with sarcasm. It seems your assumptions have landed you in quite a bit of trouble, Mrs. Steinbrenner. Karen's eyes narrowed dangerously. Trouble? You're the one causing all the trouble around here. You interloper. Interloper. Marcus let out a humorless laugh. I'm sorry, but this is my home, and that is my Wi-Fi network. You're the one who's been illegally accessing it, not the other way around. Veronica held up a hand, her expression stern. Be that as it may, this is a serious matter that requires further investigation. Mrs. Steinbrenner, I'm afraid we'll need to examine your internet usage and billing records to determine the extent of your involvement. Karen's face drained of color. My records. But you can't do that. This is an outrage. An outrage. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. I'm sorry, but I think the only outrage here is your blatant attempt to harass me and my family out of this neighborhood. And now, it seems you've been breaking the law in the process. Veronica cleared her throat, her voice grave. Mrs. Steinbrenner, if what Mr. Wilkins is saying is true, then you could be facing some very serious consequences. Illegal access to a private network is a criminal offense, and the HOA takes these matters extremely seriously. Karen's eyes darted frantically around the room, her composure slipping. This can't be happening. You have to believe me, I didn't know. Marcus shook his head, his expression hardening. Save it, Mrs. Steinbrenner. The evidence speaks for itself, and I think it's time the rest of the neighborhood knew the truth about your little crusade against me. As Karen's world began to crumble around her, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. It seemed that karma was finally catching up with the woman who had tried so relentlessly to drive him out of his own home. The heated exchange at the Homeowners Association meeting had left Karen Steinbrenner shaken and enraged. As the board members debated the next steps, she felt her carefully constructed world begin to crumble around her. In the days that followed, the news of Karen's Wi-Fi deception spread like wildfire through the tight-knit neighborhood. Neighbors who had once taken her side now regarded her with a mixture of disgust and pity. The once feared neighborhood watchdog had been exposed as a fraud, and her credibility was in tatters. Karen's husband, Ted, tried in vain to shield her from the fallout, but the damage had been done. Neighbors who had once greeted them warmly now averted their eyes or muttered under their breath as the Steinbrenners passed by. Worst of all, the HOA had launched a full-scale investigation into Karen's internet usage, combing through her billing records and internet history. The prospect of facing potential criminal charges only added to her growing sense of panic and desperation. One evening, as Karen sat alone in her kitchen, nursing a glass of wine, the doorbell rang. With a sinking feeling, she knew exactly who it was. Steeling herself, she opened the door to find Marcus Wilkins standing on her doorstep, his expression unreadable. "What do you want?" she snapped, her voice laced with bitterness. Marcus regarded her calmly. "I think we need to talk, Mrs. Steinbrenner." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Talk? About what, exactly? Haven't you done enough damage already?" "This isn't about damage, Karen." Marcus's tone was surprisingly gentle. "It's about understanding. I want to know why you did it." Karen's grip on the door frame tightened. "Why I did it? Are you seriously asking me that? You waltz into our neighborhood, and suddenly everything's not good enough for you. I was just trying to protect what's ours." Marcus shook his head. "Protect what's yours? Karen, this is my home too. I have every right to be here, just as much as you do." Karen's lips curled into a sneer. "That's where you're wrong, Mr. Wilkins. This neighborhood has always been ours, the Steinbrenners and the other longtime residents. We don't need outsiders like you coming in and trying to change things." "Change things?" Marcus let out a humorless laugh. "All I've done is live my life, Karen. I didn't ask to be part of your crusade against me. And now, because of your actions, you're the one facing the consequences." Karen's face flushed with anger. "Consequences? You think I care about the damned consequences? All I care about is getting you and your kind out of our neighborhood. Marcus's brow furrowed. My kind? Karen, this isn't about race, and it never should have been. This is about basic human decency and respecting each other's rights. Respecting rights? Karen scoffed. Don't give me that holier-than-thou crap. I know how the world works, and I'm not going to just roll over and let someone like you waltz in and take what's ours. Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You know, Karen, I used to think you were just a bully, someone who enjoyed wielding power over others. But now I see that it's something deeper than that. This isn't about me or even about the neighborhood. It's about your own insecurities and fears. Karen's eyes widened, and for a fleeting moment, Marcus saw a glimmer of vulnerability in her gaze. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered. Marcus sighed. Karen, you're so afraid of losing what you have that you're willing to do anything to protect it. But in the end, all you're doing is hurting yourself and everyone around you. Karen opened her mouth to retort, but the words caught in her throat. For the first time, she was confronted with the full weight of her actions, and the realization that her crusade against Marcus had been nothing more than a desperate attempt to cling to a world that was rapidly changing around her. As the gravity of the situation sank in, Karen felt the last shreds of her carefully constructed facade crumble. Burying her face in her hands, she began to weep. As Karen wept openly on her doorstep, Marcus Wilkins felt a pang of sympathy. Despite her relentless campaign against him, he couldn't help but recognize the deeper root of her actions. A fear of losing the comfortable, predictable world she had always known. Slowly, he reached out and placed a hand on her trembling shoulder. Karen, I know this hasn't been easy for you, but you have to understand. I'm not the enemy here. I'm just a man trying to live his life, the same as you. Karen looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and her makeup smeared. But you don't understand, she whispered hoarsely. This neighborhood, this community, it's all I have. And now, because of me, it's slipping away. Marcus nodded solemnly. I get it, Karen. You're scared of change, of losing control. But you have to realize that the world doesn't stand still. It's always moving, always evolving. And if you can't adapt, you risk being left behind. Karen let out a shaky sigh. I don't know how to do that. Everything was so simple before. And now, with the HOA investigation and the whole neighborhood turning against me. Her voice trailed off, and she shook her head despondently. Marcus paused, considering his next words carefully. Look, Karen, I know you've done some pretty terrible things. But I also know that you're not a bad person. You're just a woman who's terrified of losing everything she's ever known. He hesitated, then continued. What if I told you there's another way? A way for you to hold onto the things that are truly important, while also embracing the changes that are happening around you. Karen looked up, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. What do you mean? Marcus offered her a small smile. Well, for starters, you can apologize to me and the rest of the neighborhood. Admit that you were wrong, and that you're willing to make amends. Karen's brow furrowed. Apologize? But what about the HOA investigation? Won't I still be in trouble? Probably, Marcus acknowledged. But an honest, heartfelt apology can go a long way. It might not make the consequences disappear, but it could at least start to heal the wounds you've caused. Karen considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, I think I can do that. But what about the rest of it? How do I embrace the changes, as you put it? Marcus chuckled. Well, that's the hard part. It means letting go of some of the control you've always had, and being open to new experiences and new people. It means recognizing that the world doesn't revolve around you, and that there's room for everyone, even those who don't fit the mold of what you're used to. Karen's lips quirked in a wry smile. I suppose that's easier said than done. It is, Marcus acknowledged. But it's also necessary if you want to find happiness and fulfillment in this changing world. He paused, then added, and who knows, you might even find that you have more in common with your new neighbors than you think. Karen nodded, her expression pensive. I'll think about it. And I'll start with that apology. Marcus smiled, a sense of cautious optimism filling him. That's a good first step, Karen. The rest will come in time, if you're willing to put in the work. As Karen stepped back inside and closed the door, Marcus couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, in the end, this whole ordeal had been a catalyst for something greater. A chance for Karen to confront her fears and embrace a future that was more inclusive and connected than she ever could have imagined. Only time would tell, but for now, Marcus was content to let the healing process begin.